Call this meeting to order. Representative Shuren, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, before we get started here, I'm going to have the members introduce themselves. First off, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for hosting the policy committee today. I will lead off with member introductions, and then we'll turn it over to Representative Labs to welcome us here. We'll start with Representative Shuren.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Donna Shuren from the 147th. That is in Montgomery County, and I handle from Franconia Township all the way to Upper Pottsgrove Township. Thank you for having me.
Oh, sorry. Hello, I'm Kristen Marcel. I'm the state representative for the 178th District in Bucks County, Lower Bucks from here. It is Wrightstown Township, most of Northampton Township, Upper Southampton, and Warwick. Thank you so much to the school for hosting us and to Representative Labs for having us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Torrin Ecker, and I am from the central part of the state, or south central part of the state, from Adams and Cumberland counties. I am filling in for our chairman, Josh Kale, today, who is on other business. So thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm State Representative Shelby Labs, and I represent the 143rd Legislative District right here in Bucks County.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Representative Casey Tomlinson. I represent Lower Bucks County. That's Ben Salmon, Hume-Ville Borough. I just want to thank you all for having us, and thank you to Representative Labs for hosting this policy hearing.
Good morning. I'm Representative David Rowe from the 85th Legislative District. That includes Union, Snyder, Juniata, and Mifflin counties.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Hogan. I represent portions of Lower, but not quite Lower Bucks County.
And we do have, I know a few members will be joining us in person, I believe, still, but we also will have members coming and going online. So I just want to introduce Representative Eric Nelson from Westmoreland County and our Chairman Donna Oberlander from Clarion County. And as always, everyone knows the routine. If you guys are testifying remotely, you'll be able to ask questions. Just get my attention or get Dan's attention via text or raise your hand, and we'll make sure you get to ask a question. So without further ado, I want to thank the Upper Bucks Technical School for hosting us today, and we had lunch in their culinary area. I want to thank them for doing that for us, and I also really want to thank Representative Shelby Labs for hosting this really important hearing on something I think is going to really be riveting, and something that I think a lot of Pennsylvania doesn't even realize that is an issue. So, but is an issue. So, Representative Labs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the committee and my colleagues for being here today. I'd also like to thank the Upper Bucks Tech School for hosting this hearing, as well as our testifiers for being tremendous advocates and sources of knowledge on this topic. Stalking is a crime that affects nearly 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men. While many victims are stalked by someone they know, that's not always the case, which you will hear more about today. Many of our laws in this Commonwealth do not effectually protect victims of stalking, especially victims where they have no connection to the stalker. With the growth of social media and online search capabilities, many of our current laws do not account for the increased access stalkers have to information on someone they don't know. Over the past several months, I've worked with our Bucks County District Attorney, local law enforcement, constituents, and my colleagues to determine where our current laws are lacking and identify what changes need to be made. This was done not only through actual cases, but through personal experiences as well. We've worked hard to put together a package of bills that will give victims greater protection and allow both law enforcement and victims to have the ability to take a more proactive approach in guaranteeing their safety. Through this process, we've aimed to find solutions, and today we take the first step in ensuring Pennsylvania has laws in place that protect victims and give law enforcement the tools they need to combat this crime, all while supporting victims on the path to reclaiming their life. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony. Thanks.
And thank you, Representative Labs. And again, thank you for everybody that's here participating today. Again, why are we here? I think Representative Labs really laid it out, but this statistic, I think, it was told to me earlier today, but I think this statistic really says it all, is that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men experience stalking at some point in their lives. Think about that. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men. That's a pretty staggering number. These statistics really beg the question, is our stalking law really up to snuff? So I think that's what we're here to learn about today. We have a lot of experts and some folks that are advocates, a victim panel. We have a great hearing in front of us today, thanks to Representative Labs. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our testifiers. We have 2 panels today, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first panel, and then we'll ask questions of you, and then we'll bring up the next panel to talk about from the victim's perspective. So first today we have with us Interim Chief Nicholas Vernelson. He's the Bedminster Township Police Department. We have whoever still refers to as Chief, but no, I guess the retired Police Chief Matt Phelan. He's with the Bedminster Township Police Department. And then we have, obviously, District Attorney Jennifer Shorn here on behalf of Bucks County DA's office. Thank you. Moving in, the first panel, again, is going to talk about just the stalking crimes and their perspective from law enforcement. And again, it's our hope is to improve awareness of stalking and what it is to be that crime. Each testifier will ask you to stay about 3 to 5 minutes. If you go over a little bit, that's okay. But after each of you testify, we'll ask questions and try to have a robust conversation about what we're doing here today. So, Chief Vernelson, you're up first.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak in front of you today. Representative Labs has been focused on legislation that would close flaws in the existing PFA laws. These flaws are not frequently exploited, as cases like the one I'm going to tell you about do not happen often, but they do exist. Bedminster Township is a rural community that is 32 square miles and about 7,300 residents. If cases like this can happen here, it can happen just about anywhere. The name of the victim in this case has been changed to protect her identity. In 2015, Jane was standing on a bridge in New Hope, PA, when Andrew approached her saying, "Hi, Jane," and continued to speak using her name several times. She denied knowing Andrew and ignored him. Over the next several months, while she was at restaurants in Doylestown, she began noticing Andrew, who was always by himself and often looking at her. On one occasion, he was standing outside the bathroom when she was walking out and attempted to engage in conversation. Over the next several years, Andrew used real and fictitious social media accounts to harass Jane by calling her derogatory names, sending her sexually explicit photos, and pretending to be her family members. During this time, Jane had changed residences several times in various states in the western United States. In 2001, Jane called the Bedminster police as she believed she was being stalked by Andrew, whom she had not seen in years. She realized this once a neighbor had caught Andrew parked outside of her house and took pictures of him, then posted it to social media. Once this report was made, police identified Andrew as being a suspicious person they have observed around Jane's house on multiple occasions over the last several years. Jane was instructed to obtain a protection from abuse order while police continued an investigation, but she was not eligible because she did not have any relationship to Andrew. Over the next year, Andrew continued to be found almost daily and during the daytime and midnight hours parked outside of Jane's house or walking around the back of her house. At times, he was seen in possession and or using binoculars, 2 enhanced listening devices, one being a parabolic microphone and the other a device that must be pressed against the wall to hear on the inside of the wall, both used for interception and communications. Andrew was observed in this neighborhood so frequently that neighbors knew his car by license plate and would expect to see him while they were out and about and often took photographs for police. The police had several conversations with Andrew about his actions, which did not have any impact. During this year, Jane lived in fear for herself and her young child. She had to advise her daughter's school about Andrew and to not allow anyone to pick up her daughter other than her. She changed her daily habits so it was not routine, purchased security cameras, a firearm, took firearm training lessons, and upgraded other home security features to protect herself and her daughter. During this year, police worked diligently, estimated over 1,000 hours, building a stalking case against Andrew. Eventually, an arrest warrant was issued for Andrew. He was contacted to come to the Bedminster Township Police Headquarters, but decided to drive around the victim's neighborhood one more time beforehand, where he was taken in custody behind Jane's residence. During a subsequent search warrant of Andrew's vehicle, the following items were found: a handgun, which was purchased within the last several days, several hundred rounds of ammunition, a backpack, duct tape, and binoculars. One can only assume the next plan of Andrew's was to harm Jane or her 2-year-old daughter. Andrew was arrested and incarcerated for nearly 2 years as a result of his ongoing actions. If Jane was able to obtain a protection from abuse order at the beginning of this investigation, police would have been able to make a swift arrest of Andrew, and it could have saved a lifetime of mental suffering, as she is on the constant lookout for Andrew to return.
Thank you, Chief. Moving on now, Mr. Phelan, if you would like to provide your testimony.
I'd like to start by thanking the House of Representatives for holding this important hearing to ensure that law enforcement has the necessary legal tools at their disposal to help protect victims of stalking and hold offenders accountable. I recently retired from law enforcement after serving several positions for 3 agencies from 1998 to 2024, my most recent position being the Chief of Police in Bedminster Township. During my tenure as police chief there, I supervised the investigation and arrest of Andrew Gold, as described in the testimony by Chief Nelson. In the interest of time, I will not repeat these facts, but I'll share with you the challenges I faced as the head of a small agency conducting this investigation. My testimony will focus on the hurdles I faced while trying to protect the victim, resource allocation, and managing the community fear created by the offender. While we were building our criminal case on the stalking charges, I reached out to attorneys who work with victims, hoping that one of the existing protection from abuse orders in Pennsylvania will be able to serve as a mechanism to offer some level of protection for our victim. Unfortunately, I learned that there are gaps in these protection orders that did not allow our victim to be eligible for a protection from abuse order, a sexual violence protection order, or a protection from intimidation order. The PFA did not apply because there was no intimate partner or family relationship. The sexual violence protection order did not apply because our resident was not a sexual violence victim. The protection from intimidation did not apply because our resident was not a minor. After looking at all these options, it's clear to me that the Commonwealth seeks to protect its residents from stalking behaviors, but a resident who is an adult being targeted by a stranger is not eligible for protection order assistance. It's generally accepted that stalking falls into 3 categories. From most familiar to least familiar, they are intimate partner stalking, acquaintance stalking, and stranger stalking. Intimate partner stalking will be a current or former intimate partner. Acquaintance stalking occurs when a victim knows the actor from school, work, or some other legitimate interaction. And stranger stalking occurs when the victim does not know the identity of their stalker. Our case was a stranger stalking case, and it upset me greatly when my inquiries led me to determine that stranger stalking, which could be argued is likely the most terrifying for the victim, cannot be deterred by any of the current protection orders in the Commonwealth. I think this needs to be closely examined by the legislature. I think it's a good place to start. We'll be lifting the requirement on the protection from intimidation orders that the victim is a minor. Second aspect I will discuss is the amount of law enforcement resources that were required to investigate this case and protect the victim, which could have been significantly less if this type of behavior could have been protected under the umbrella of a protection order. A review of the case led me to assume that we allocated at least 1,000 hours of officer time to this matter, plus many hours of work by the Bucks County detectives and the assistant district attorney assigned to the case. Most of the Bedminster PD hours were worked by Interim Chief Nelson, who served as the supervisor of criminal investigations at the time. That equals to about half of all the hours he would have been scheduled to work in a calendar year. This is significant because, like many departments across Pennsylvania, Bedminster Township PD, with its 8 officers, is a small law enforcement agency that must split its time amongst many responsibilities, including traffic enforcement, patrol, emergency responses, community policing, and criminal investigations. If we had been able to resolve this matter quicker with an appropriate protection order, those hours could have been used more efficiently to serve the needs of the community. The final task I was faced with during this case was managing the response of the community to this individual's actions. The neighborhoods where the offender stalks his victims were very much on edge due to his bizarre behavior. The observed stalking behaviors had many parents concerned for the safety of their children and family members. There were many police reports from concerned residents who wanted their police department to stop this frightening behavior, and a few altercations between residents and the offender that could have ended tragically. I was very concerned that one or more of these residents, tired of looking over their shoulders, would take matters into their own hands, and that someone would be hurt during an altercation with this individual. I had to have many conversations with frightened residents to build trust that the police were doing everything possible to bring the situation to an end, so they could enjoy their neighborhoods again without worrying about the safety of their families. After the trial ended, the Honorable Judge Gilman wrote an opinion. If there was ever a case of stalking and harassment rising to the level of significant criminal conduct, this is it. I wholeheartedly agree with His Honor's assessment, and this is why I applaud Representative Shelby Labs and the PA House of Representatives for examining this issue with intent to help individuals in the future from having to live through this type of nightmare that our resident and community endured. Thank you for your time and for your diligent work on this important matter.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the esteemed panel of legislators here today to address this issue, and thank Representative Labs, who I've had the pleasure of working with closely on a number of matters, but this is truly a passion project, I believe, for a number of us. Chief Vernilson and retired Chief Phelan summed up a case that just defines the issues and the limitations in the stalking statute as it exists today. Most of us understand the fatal attraction type stalking case, a former paramour, a former intimate partner, where they want their victim to understand that they are stalking them and that they won't let go, and they want to and intend to torment and cause emotional distress towards their victim. Those are relatively easy to investigate, but easy to prosecute because the elements are there and defined in the statute. The problem with the statute as it exists today is it does not account for the surreptitious stalker. As you so well, you literally put the focus on the issue, that if there's someone who is intending to stalk a victim because they are obsessing about that victim. Excuse me, I'm dealing with a little bit of a laryngitis for about the last 4 weeks, so forgive me for the lozenge and for my voice kind of going in and out. The surreptitious stalker wants to stalk their victim because they are relentlessly pursuing them. They have an obsessive interest in that victim. And as you put it so eloquently with the access to victims now with social media, the amount of information they can glean from using various things to kind of identify their movements allows for them to have complete and utter access to these victims. For the vast majority of those cases, there is no crime to charge. And I will not forget when Chief Phelan, then retired Chief Phelan now, called me about this case. And initially, they spoke to a junior colleague of mine who said, I'm sorry, it doesn't meet the elements. And that junior colleague was right, because he was surreptitiously stalking her. His intent wasn't to cause emotional distress. He had a far more deviant intent. His intent was to pursue her for his own sexual gratification, and perhaps worse, given what was ultimately found in his possession when he was arrested. His intent wasn't to get caught. His intent wasn't for her he did not try to terrorize her and cause her emotional distress. So the proposed changes to the statute are relatively simple, but absolutely life-altering for our ability to investigate and prosecute these crimes. Excuse me for a minute, I'm gonna have to take a sip. And that is by allowing the language to pardon me, I feared this, to reflect what we all understand stalking behavior to be. And if you simply modify the language to take out that the intent of the stalker is to cause emotional distress or fear bodily injury, but add language that says would cause a reasonable person, recklessly or knowingly engages in the conduct that would cause a reasonable person to fear bodily injury or experience emotional distress, that covers it. That covers your surreptitious stalker. That covers your stalker who has the fatal attraction tendencies where they want their victim to know that they're stalking them. And when I say that, I've been a prosecutor in this county for 25 years, and there have been cases where we have been unable to prosecute, and these victims have suffered through those criminal acts, because they are criminal acts, we all know it, without law enforcement or the prosecution being able to do anything to protect them, and that's just appalling. So I know there's going to be more questions, and I'll expound on it, but that's the crux of the issue in conjunction with what retired Chief Phelan said about protection orders. The fact that they're limited for adults to former intimate partners or current intimate partners is a huge, huge concern and something that needs to be remedied. So again, I thank you all for addressing this issue. It really is a passion project. We need to protect our victims, and 1 in 3 and 1 in 6, it's unacceptable.
Well, thank you all for your testimony. I just want to acknowledge that Representative Jim Rigby from Cambria County is online, and we've also been joined by Representative John Lawrence from Chester County. We will now move into questions. Representative Rowe.
Well, thank you very much. Hearing the story, I mean, it sounds terrifying. It's not something that I've experienced, but I can't imagine, walking out your door every single day wondering, is that guy going to be there? You can't go walk through the grocery store. Is he going to be at the end of that aisle or this aisle? Is there any, I mean, maybe this, I don't know if anybody's a psychologist in the room, but what leads to that level of infatuation to where someone can spend years? I mean, is this somebody that he found her on social media, or just in New Hope walked past her on the bridge and was like, hey, she's pretty, and that led to a multi-year deranged pursuit? Is there any sort of psychological background or study on what causes this type of deranged behavior?
I can say that I wish there was, because then we'd be able to identify who poses a threat to the average person. His behavior was shocking. As far as we know, he simply found her to be a very attractive woman who he began obsessing over. And this behavior transpired over the course of years, and her moving to the West Coast and him just pursuing her relentlessly. But unfortunately, we just don't know, because the average person may look like they don't have these tendencies, but sadly, they do. And, I wish we had the ability to identify psychologically what's happening. Sadly, we see that in so many crimes. We ask the why, and sometimes you never know the why. You can't, get into the head of an individual who's who's a deviant like that. I wish there was an answer.
So then when you look at, you kind of referenced it, I mean, he followed her through different states, right? I mean, that's a level of commitment there. What does that make your life more difficult from a jurisdictional perspective? Is there any sort of, multi-state cooperative, or is that not really possible because you have different state laws? Or were you only able to start building your case once it finally, started to happen here?
I'm going to just speak to the outstanding work that Bedminster did on this case, because they were not deterred. They knew there were limitations in the statute as it exists today, but they were like, I don't care. We need to investigate this and use every resource, and then, gathered historical information. I will say we have a great partnership with our federal partners, and we have a great partnership with other jurisdictions that we commonly work with. So that is not necessarily the impediment, but truly in Pennsylvania, the impediment is the statute as it exists. But we are fortunate, but they did the lion's share of the work. My county detectives assisted towards, the latter part of the investigation, but it was remarkable, the work they did and their determination to make sure that justice was served for this victim.
I would just add to that, I think you mentioned the social media component of it. We do know that was definitely a component of it, and that we believe helped with the early locating of her, and then also following her across state lines like that. We did have help from our federal partners with some digital device searches and things that were used. This went to a trial, so this went to a 4 or 5 day jury trial where we got a guilty conviction. So all of that evidence was necessary to go before the 12 people who ultimately decided, yes, this was stalking.
And do you think the language that Representative Labs has introduced, is that something that would then be statewide? Because, I mean, the district I represent, the overwhelming majority of my municipalities do not have police coverage because they're just too rural. So we have to rely on PSP coverage. But there are hours in the day where we'll have one PSP trooper covering one entire county. So, tracking something. So is this something that would enable them to be more efficient in pursuing these sort of issues as well?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And I've spoken to my colleagues, fellow appointed or elected district attorneys, 201, every single one of us in this Commonwealth has expressed the same concern about the statute as it presently is, but with the amendments to the statute, that will allow for justice to be served for countless victims, the 1 in 3, 1 in 6. It would be life-altering. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and thank you, gentlemen, for your hard work. Thank you very much.
Representative Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today and providing this background. I have two questions, and I'll go with this one because we were just on the topic of the social media companies. Now, when this investigation is ongoing, or these types of investigations, do those companies work with local law enforcement in providing any type of available information, or is that more of they only work with the FBI?
So the social media companies do work with us. Usually it's pursuant to a search warrant, though. We can't just go ask them for information. And then with certain companies, if they delete their account, a lot of the information may or may not be lost as well. So that's another hurdle we have to jump over.
All right, well, thank you for that. My next question is, building off this individual, following his sentencing, which 2 years for a first-time offender, maybe that's appropriate, I don't know, but does Pennsylvania law require individuals in these cases to be put on a sex offender registry or any sort of, counseling, sexual deviant counseling or anything like that?
So there are some cases where there is an overlap, where the stalker has some underlying sexual offenses that trigger SORNA, the sexual offender registration, but this particular defendant did not. So once he serves his time and once he's no longer on parole or probation, he is free to do what he's going to do, and we know what he's going to do. So that is a very big concern. I also just want to, if you would indulge me for a minute, Representative Hogan, Chief Vernelson mentioned the search warrants. The amount of time officers and detectives have to spend preparing court orders and search warrants for social media records, you can't even imagine the amount of time they spend. And then they have to travel to Doylestown to wait. Sometimes 14 officers, detectives are waiting to get court orders signed. We have administrative subpoenas for crimes involving child pornography. And other states do have subpoena power to access these documents. Pennsylvania does not. And that's something that is worth kind of discussing for future remedies as well. That would substantially reduce manpower hours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hogan. And just so you know, I had a conference this morning dealing with that exact issue, dealing with the registry for sexually violent. It's something. Hopefully, looking at legislation on that this fall. You were too. That's why you asked. Anyway, this is what happens when you drive and do Teams meetings. But anyway, Representative Tomlinson.
Representative Hogan kind of already touched on it, but as I was listening, obviously we see the changes we need to make. My concern for this victim is why she might have 2 years apiece. What happens afterwards? Is there anything that we can do legislatively to keep her protected? Because I think all of us up here, we try and put ourselves in our constituents' shoes and work in a way that they would want us to work. So how can we best serve this victim legislatively and make sure that this perpetrator can no longer antagonize her life?
I think probably the most useful tool would be to look at the PFAs, and if you're able to maybe amend or adjust the PFI, which is that protection from intimidation. So right now that allows for protection from this type of behavior if your victim is a minor. Well, it shouldn't just be if the victim's a minor. Our victim wasn't a minor, but she should be protected from intimidation. So I think expand that.
Thank you.
Yep.
And if I could just add to that, Representative Tomlinson, what that allows for law enforcement to do is when that order is in place, the most minor of technical violations allows for us to make an arrest immediately. So if we were allowed to expand on the time frame as well, because we know hopefully if we're successful at prosecuting, that PFI should extend beyond the sentence. Or the victim should have the ability to apply for one upon parole or probation, and that would then allow law enforcement to have a swift response if there's a violation.
If I could just add to that. So if there had been a prior relationship and she was eligible for a PFA, we could have made a criminal arrest on the PFA violation much sooner than it took to build the case and prove those elements that the DA referenced.
Well, thank you for your answers, and thank you for your work on this case.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your service to Bucks County. So when we started off this hearing, Chairman Ecker had mentioned a statistic that 1 in 3 women had experienced stalking, and that really hit home for me because when I was younger, I had a version of stalking that occurred. It was more of the acquaintance stalking that you mentioned earlier. This account is unbelievable. Like, this case is unbelievable. Nothing like this ever occurred, obviously, for me, but just reading this, like, I still get chills talking about it. It's just haunting to think that someone went through this and that other women are going to be possibly experiencing this as well. So just to follow up, you had mentioned that if we had the ability to do a PFI or PFA earlier, that would have made the timeline move up. I mean, can you ballpark how much that would have moved the case up? Or, we have an estimate of how many hours, or just what is that time frame? Because it seems like that it would have saved the victim, obviously, a lot that occurred within her own time. All the time, the man hours, the taxpayer resources, there are a lot of things to consider. And so, I think that really struck home when you mentioned that with Representative Tomlinson. So if you guys had a sense of how much earlier that would have been.
So she likely would have been able to apply for a PFA then, probably in 2015, when she kept seeing him while she was at different restaurants in Doylestown and stalking her through social media, whereas we arrested Andrew in 2001. So it would have 21, yes. So it would have saved several years.
Yes.
Correct.
Wow, that's amazing. And then my last question is, because of the increase of social media and the use of technology, I was speaking with some students from the school we're at earlier about, my daughter will talk about if she's on Snapchat and how she can see all of the people around her, but some of the people she knows from Snapchat, she doesn't really know. I wouldn't define it as her knowing them, yet everyone can see where they are. Do you think that there's a potential increase in the future, or is this more of a concern than even what we're thinking about, now potentially?
So I don't think stalking is new. I just think that the mechanism of using a digital device like we do in every other aspect of our life is now another tool for the stalker to use. So, the equivalent of, 10, 15 years ago, how you would deposit your paycheck and get some money would take a lot more work versus today when it can happen instantaneously.
And if I may just add to that, I think you're so right, Representative Marcel. With technology today, we're unwittingly inviting people into our homes and our lives. And obviously, I use social media. I allow my children to use social media. But I live every day in fear because we see it so often that those who are criminally minded will exploit it. And, Chief Phelan, retired Chief Phelan, indicated stalking's not new, but the access, it's exponentially increased now with social media. You may have found someone stalking someone he found attractive in his neighborhood, or who he worked with. But now it is just, the access is just, we can't even calculate. It's incalculable how much access people have now. And so sadly, we've seen an uptick in so many crimes, just like child pornography, because of, social media.
Thank you very much.
Representative Labs.
Thank you. Just since we're talking about the social media, we could probably have a whole other hearing on that. But since we do have a room full of students, and are there any things in your experience right off the top that you would say, do not post that on, like, don't share your location, don't, just a couple things that we can just put out there right now? Again, I know that that is a loaded question and a loaded topic, but since we're talking about it, any ways to safeguard?
So I think the main rule is don't put anything out there that you don't want your parents or teachers to see. And also, it doesn't go away. Whether you snap it or it's TikTok, if somebody takes a screenshot of it, you think it may have gone away and disappeared because that's what the app, that's how they market the app. That's not necessarily true. If somebody screen recorded it, that could unfortunately come back. And it has long-lasting impacts, not just now, but if you go into the military or college, future careers. When you do a background check on somebody now, that's it's another box you check, is take a look and see what's on social media.
If I could just add one more point to that, we talk about sexual predators, sexual deviants who are pursuing those who are most vulnerable among us, our children, our teens, our young adults. But the other side of that coin is our those who exploit, the sextortion. We're seeing that the most vulnerable population, they're targeting adolescent age boys most predominantly, and girls, and they're asking them to share intimate images under the guise of being, an interested partner. And kids are taking their own lives because they don't speak up. So if you fall prey to that, it's a scam. It's a theft scam. But if you fall prey to that, you have to trust these professionals. I get to work with the best of the best in law enforcement, in Bucks County. They're all over the Commonwealth. We have wonderful men and women in law enforcement, but you got to speak up. That's just my one passion project as well. Don't suffer in silence, whether you are a victim of a sexual predator or sextortion.
Thank you. And I know Representative Tomlinson had legislation recently on that topic as well. So very, very important. And the second part to that is still in the PFA realm, but in these changes that we're talking about, I think we've all heard the stories about, PFA court and having to go and, continue, the PFA. Do you feel like in maybe these situations where there is no connection, there's no relationship, I can assume that the victim would never want to have contact with this gentleman again? Would something like a permanent PFA, is that in the realm? Is that something that is, would it have to be situational? Could that potentially be a thing?
I think in cases such as this, our victim would benefit and be very much in for a permanent PFA. I think that would be the case in most random stalking cases as well.
I think like any PFA, the judicial discretion will be key there, because they're going to have to look at all these cases uniquely. Fortunately, as far as we know, there aren't too many cases this extreme. So most of them probably might not qualify for a type of an extended PFA. However, when you have, facts like this and a conviction, I think that would be easy for a judge to look at that and decide that, that's probably a good tool for the victim.
Thank you.
Representative Shuren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would like to thank all of you for your work on this case. I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for all of you. It's only natural that you're going to grow close to these victims and want to help them in every way possible. And we need to get this fixed so your frustration level can get down to a normal one. with that, how does our state, our definition of stalking measure up to other states? And then I would lead into the second point, which Jennifer touched on, when the cases are cross-jurisdictional, where the perpetrator and the victim are in different states. How does that measure up? Meaning, is it possible that if one state is much more intense, can we, fall to that level? Would that take precedence if one state's laws are much weaker? I would be very curious to know, since Representative Labs is looking to fix this, if that has to factor into our decision on making sure we're just as tough as the other 49.
I will say that I think that it's such a great question. I think the vast majority of states initially faced this same issue, and then they have corrected it. And but it's so narrow, but it's like mind-blowing, the impact, the negative impact. So many of our surrounding states don't have this limitation that we do in Pennsylvania. So what we typically do in any case, because we border so many other counties and, close in proximity to New Jersey, border New Jersey and the city of Philadelphia, not another state, but we assess who has the best ability to prosecute and who has the best ability to secure the best sentence. And so, as you can imagine, probably no shock to any of you, we are often telling Philadelphia, when a crime bleeds into Bucks County, we'll take it. We want to prosecute. Similarly, if we're working with our counterparts in another state, and we'll use all of our resources to help them if they are better situated. But at the end of the day, I think Pennsylvania does it best. So I want to have the ability to make sure we are capturing all of these predators. But we work closely with other jurisdictions to determine who's best situated to get the best outcome. And we know that individuals like these cannot conform their conduct. They don't. So we need external measures to keep them, on our radar. And those external measures are very lengthy PFAs, or at least if not a lifetime PFA, something that can renew with even the smallest technical violation to continue to provide that protection and allow law enforcement to act swiftly if they violate. So, it all ties in, but it's a great point that you brought up.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank. I think at the outset, I know everyone has thank you, but this is a testament to good police work from top to bottom. This particular case that we're talking about, you guys have a lot to be proud of. Given the constraints that you were in, I think it highlights the importance of law enforcement in our communities and everything from down to the police officers to through the DA's office. I think this is highlights how important law enforcement is in our community. And thank you guys for this case, because I know this wasn't an easy one. This is a square peg, round hole kind of situation, but you figured it out. And I think the victim in this case is safer now because of your police work. So I want to thank you for that from the outset. You guys are off the hot seat now. Thank you for your time. Next panel is going to be talking about empowering victims. If the next two testifiers want to come up. Okay. Well, I want to thank this panel here talking about empowering victims. With us today, we have Lori Hepler. She's a civilian community relations specialist and a victim advocate from the Bedminster Township Police. And Gail Marinelli. She's a local resident here in Bucks County. So I will, I'll let you guys decide who to go first.
Thank you for being here and listening to my story. My marriage ended in August of 2016, the exact moment I became a victim of domestic violence. It was a realization of all the red flags I missed or ignored previously in our marriage. He was escorted out of my house in handcuffs as he laughed, walking by me. I immediately changed the locks and never allowed him in my house again. Within a few days, I obtained a temporary protection from abuse order. The abuse order became permanent until August of 2021. He was found guilty of assault and harassment in a Bucks County courtroom of January of 2017. After this guilty verdict is when the stalking began. He harassed my family and I in many different ways, using many outlets to get to us. He wrote notes and left them in my mailbox. He texted my mother and friends. He wrote long narratives on Facebook with personal details, threats, and many mistruths. He wrote a letter to my family member's employer, to the CEO, by the way, trying to claim that he knew my family member was not doing their job for this company. He drove past my house almost every morning in his noisy blue truck. He knew my routine, and he took advantage of it. Before leaving for work, I would walk my dogs every morning, which was his opportunity to harass me. During the months of February, March, and April of 2017, I have recorded notes, pictures, and video of his blue truck driving past my house several times each week. Then, mysteriously, sightings of him stopped. I thought he finally gave up stalking me. I didn't understand why, but I thought maybe all of the phone calls to his probation officer or the Plumstead Township Police scared him away. That all changed in May of 2017 when we showed up in court with our lawyers to discuss the distribution of our assets. We were asked about our vehicles, what we drive, who purchased them, who owns them, etc. That is when he mentioned a new car he purchased. At that moment, I froze, and I don't remember anything else from that meeting. I realized then he was probably still watching my every move, and I didn't know it. So after court, I watched him go to the parking lot from the courthouse to see him climb into a red sedan. It was just a few days later I began to see that red sedan passing by my house. I had never rested or let my guard down, but then to realize he probably never stopped stalking me was frightening. I felt weak and so uninformed. He was driving around for weeks in a different car, and I had no idea that he was still watching me. Neighbors and friends told me of the many sightings of him. Several times he would stop his car and pull over, walk to my fence, and pet my dogs. As a victim of his abuse, I feel it's important for me to know his vehicle. I need to be able to protect myself and be aware of my surroundings. My family, friends, and the police need to know when a guilty person is coming so close to breaking the law once again. Making connections between the abuser, the vehicle, and the protection from abuse order would be extremely beneficial to domestic violence victims. This information would give many victims a much-needed feeling of security. I hope a database can be created to give the victims and the police a bit more control over the manipulation of stalkers. After being stalked and a victim of his abuse, I was court-ordered to pay him alimony of $817.44 a month from the Office of the Master in Divorce, Bucks County. As a victim, my teacher paycheck, I'm just a teacher, had a deduction that was going directly to him, the man found guilty of my bruises. The man who manipulated, isolated, and stalked me was being paid by me. I was in disbelief that this was possible. Once again, I felt the abuse, the belittling, and the humiliation. This ruling haunts and torments me every day, which is not fair. Fortunately, I was surrounded by many wonderful people during this difficult experience. Many loved ones supported me. Family, friends, and neighbors, and the Plumstead Police, of course, but also advocates who work so diligently to help victims. Many of these people volunteer their own time. While questioning the alimony order many times, I was told it involves 2 different departments and they don't talk. Well, after some time to reflect and learn the perspectives of other victims, I hope you agree to start talking. This is an important piece to protect victims and help their healing. My divorce was final August 7th, 2017, probably one of the happiest days of my life. I'm here to speak today for many victims of domestic violence that have been so violated by their abusers and feel they don't have a voice. Bringing hope and awareness to the mistreatment of domestic violence victims means I needed to share this regretful time in my life in a public forum, which, as you can see, is very difficult, to say the least. I hope my story can help you make the right decisions for victims. I am asking that this new legislation prevents abuser who has been found guilty in a court of law in our county of Bucks and all counties to be accountable and have negative consequences for their actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that. Ms. Helpler?
My name is Laurie Hepler, and I am a civilian community relations specialist and in-house victim advocate for the Bedminster Township Police Department. I'd like to begin by thanking Gail for telling her story. It took a lot of courage for her to speak before you today. Gail, thank you for being so selfless. You could have simply moved on with your life, placing everything in the past, yet you chose to stand for future victims. You had to relive the pain of your experience, and for that I am grateful. In-house victim advocates differ from traditional victim advocates that work for nonprofit agencies. We are able to serve victims immediately, sometimes on scene, and we do not need to wait for a phone call from the victim or for a referral. This immediate connection gets victims resources as soon as possible, frees up law enforcement time to investigate the case, and improves victim cooperation and follow-through. In the first 6 months of my position, we were able to increase our protection from abuse orders by 325% from the same 6 months the year prior. Our calls for domestic violence did not increase, just the number of victim follow-throughs with orders increased. We attribute this to the impact that immediate and consistent advocacy has on a victim. These orders not only offered protections to our victims, but also reduced the number of repeat calls, freeing up law enforcement's time to patrol or follow up on other investigations. So often, officers go back to the same house for domestic disputes multiple times a week or even in a single day. In-house advocates are sparse in Pennsylvania. Many other cities and some states follow the model, yet Pennsylvania seems to lag behind in victim services. This model allows victims to have the same advocate throughout the case. Not only does this build trust, it improves the likelihood of victim cooperation and acceptance of resources, but it also allows the advocate better insight into the blind spots in the system. Many of these blind spots are why we are here today. In Pennsylvania, we have 3 types of protection orders: PFAs, PFIs, and SVPOs. As noted by Chief Phelan, all orders have certain qualifiers. Many individuals are familiar with the most common protection order, the PFA, and many people believe that if they were to be abused, stalked, or harassed, that they could obtain one. We know this isn't always the case. Without doubt, one of the hardest parts of my job is telling a victim that we cannot help them or we cannot protect them. Telling a victim that they are not eligible for protection under Title 23 for a PFA because their relational status does not qualify is extremely frustrating. The offender can commit the same act, but the victim cannot petition the court for protection because he or she does not fall within the required relationship to his or her offender. Where generally individuals feel they are constitutionally guaranteed equal protection under the law that the 14th Amendment describes, Pennsylvania law requires victims to qualify their eligibility even when the offense is the same. By the time a victim comes to me and wants to obtain a protection order, they have already experienced significant fear and trauma, and if their eligibility isn't there, I leave them with hopelessness. The cinematics of the Andrew Gold case we just heard were attention-grabbing, and now everybody is listening, but the reality is PFA and PFI ineligibility occurs every day. Through a tremendous amount of law enforcement hours and dedication, this case worked out, but my fear is for the ones who don't. Even now, the victim in this case does not qualify for a protection order. Her offender is out of prison. We know the details of the case, yet still ineligible. Platonic roommates would not qualify for a protection order. Classmates who never dated would not qualify for protection orders. Neighbors who stalk, coworkers who harass, strangers from the street, the list goes on. The offense is the same. The fear is the same. It's just the protection that discriminates. I would propose that Title 23 be rewritten to eliminate eligible qualifiers and allow anyone to petition the court for a protection from abuse. The court should not limit victim protections based on DNA or sexual history. Alternatively, we could rewrite Title 42 to eliminate age requirements for protection from intimidation or PFI orders. I would also propose an upgrade to the Protection of Abuse database. The database, known as PFAD, was implemented in 1997 so that law enforcement would know if an individual had an active protection order. upgrading the database to include PFIs, and require offenders to self-report when they move, change jobs, or get a new car, and notifying victims of these changes would alleviate victim fear even through an active order. As Gail described, her experience of learning when her offender with an active order purchased a new vehicle without her knowledge, she believed the stalking had stopped, where in reality she just couldn't see it. Bedminster had a similar case, only the victim knew her abuser had purchased a new car. She just didn't know what and was always looking over her shoulder. I had another victim take her child to the hospital for an emergency, only to learn that their offender now works there. The victim's PFA protected her and that child needing care that night. She called me completely panicked when she learned that her abuser was there, where they were already in a vulnerable position. She tells me that had she known, she would have chosen a different hospital. This registry can operate similar to the Megan's Law registry already in place in Pennsylvania, where offenders report on these life changes. The PFAD system would simply remain private, only notifying victims of certain criteria and providing law enforcement access when necessary. The protection from abuse laws were put into place in good faith to help those experiencing domestic violence. However, we are failing to protect all Pennsylvanians. Victims of harassment, stalking, intimidation, and abuse should all have the right to equal protection, regardless of their relationship to their offender. All Pennsylvanians should feel safe in their house, at work, or in public. Implementing these changes may not make every victim feel 100% safe, as the trauma is sure to linger, but it will offer some solace and give law enforcement the tools to act and protect. I want to thank Representative Labs for listening to our concerns and bringing us here today. It is my hope that we can work together to fill the gaps and make Pennsylvania a more victim-centered state. Thank you.
Ms. Marinette, I want to thank you again for sharing your story and being willing to do that today. I think that really gives perspective, and your strength is incredible, and thank you for doing so today. I'm going to turn to questions now, and like I said, I promise they're going to be nice, easy questions. Representative Labs.
Thank you. And I want to echo that. I want to thank you both very much for your testimony. Thank you for sharing today. I know it's been a hard road to get here, and I appreciate you sharing, and we're going to help a lot of people. So I wanted to touch on the alimony piece of this, because when we first met and you told me your story, I think my jaw was on the ground. I said, seriously, there's no safety nets in place for this. Oh. And so we together worked on legislation that has been introduced that would disqualify a convicted abuser from receiving alimony. So that's been introduced, and I wanted to say that that's because of you and your story, and we're going to push that forward. So I wanted to make note of that.
Thank you.
Secondly, Lori, again, I think when we first met and we talked about these different things, my jaw was also on the floor, just how gaping these holes are in the law. And the thing that I kind of you touched on it in your testimony, but to kind of drill in a little bit to your job, because we are very lucky and unique here in not only Bucks County, but in this district, to have your position is the pilot program for this victim advocate. Am I correct? You are one of the only ones in the common.
Sorry. I believe they told me they would yell at me.
That's the worst you're going to get.
To my knowledge, there are 4 of us in the state.
Okay.
2 that work in Central Bucks Regional Police Department. They are solely victim advocates. They serve Doylestown Borough, Doylestown Township, New Britain Township, and Plumstead Township. We modeled this program partially on that. I'm a victim advocate, but also do community relations work and crime prevention. And then we were fortunate enough, through your help, through a new grant, to bring on the same role for me for Percy Borough, and we expanded into the Bedminster Percy Community Relations Program. But throughout the rest of the state, we do not believe there are in-house advocates. I think perhaps maybe the city of Philadelphia might have some, but it was my knowledge that I was number 3 in the state.
If you could just speak a little bit to that. I am so passionate about the job that you do and the position because I feel like you are the boots on the ground with these victims. You know them, you live in this community, you are able to walk them through the process. They get to see a friendly face, get the information that they need in a timely manner, and I feel like other departments having access to funds to have this position is crucial. So that's something that we've talked about. If you could just talk a little bit more
Sure,
about that.
absolutely. One of the biggest differences between my role and what other departments need to do with having victim advocates is the victim has to reach out, where I can reach out directly. I read a case, or an officer will call me right to a scene sometimes if they think it would be helpful, and I get to start it right now, start that connection. What we found out through my position is so many victims, their re-victimization, I don't know the statistic, but it's huge, have already been through it. They've already dealt with perhaps a nonprofit that they do great work and they try hard, but they're super understaffed. They also come in only if asked and after the fact. Whereas the ability for me to be able to immediately help people, immediately say, these are the resources, this is my phone number, you can text me, they feel, we have found that it's making people act, it's making victims act. The 325% increase in our protection orders was very telling. We were shocked when that happened. But it's just the follow-up. It's just constantly being there for the victims. It's them knowing who you are. And it's also, they don't deal with a different advocate in different stages. That's really important too. So they don't have to retell their story. They don't have to relive it. I'm already familiar. I know where we're going to go. I know where your kids go to school, and we can work around that schedule too. So those types of things have really made the difference. And then also having access, I think, to both sides of it, because I am in the police department. So it's more, I see both sides. I know what the next steps are going to be and are able to pass that along so they feel more comfortable, our victims.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Certainly for helping the victims, but Ms. Marinelli, thank you for your bravery in sharing your story. I think that sometimes we talked about the 1 in 3 statistic. Even through my own experiences, have realized that a lot of times, like once you tell someone that something happened, they're more likely to tell you, what happened in their own life. And so there might be some people that, feel like more understood, or feel that maybe they can seek some help and work with someone going forward. So I just wanted to thank you for your bravery. So the question that I had relates to, kind of when does a victim of a traumatic stalking incident feel safe? It seems like, Ms. Marinelli, when you were going through your experiences, there were so many moments that were so difficult for you. And we talked about the registry, the vehicle updates, different things that maybe along the way we could have done if we could change the law or create something. But if we're trying to look for ways to help support victims better, if you guys have perspectives on maybe some things that we can do so that at some point you do feel safe and you feel more protected. So I just if you could provide some comments, I would appreciate that.
I was very aware the day that my PFA was expiring. And at that day, that week, that month, I was high on alert, watching and watching and watching. And then, of course, I'm looking for the red sedan. I don't know if that's still his car. I'm not sure. I don't have enough information. I don't know where he's living anymore. I don't know any of those details on him. I really don't want to know, but then I would like to know to feel a little bit safer. But once that PFA expired and I kept a lookout and there was no sign of him anywhere, I started to relax. But it probably took a year or two after that. So.
Thank you for sharing that.
I can speak to that too. It's been my experience that every victim's different as to what makes them feel comfortable. But for sure, the more information they have, the better they feel, the more knowledge they have. So something like the database that we've talked about would just it gives them something, right? They're never going to feel, like I said, 100% safe, but at least they know they're safe because they know what car, or they know this person works here, or, you know, little things like that that fortunately most of us don't have to think about. Our victims live in constant fear, worrying about it, and I think access to the database and the notifications would really improve their comfort.
Thank you very much.
Representative Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of dovetailing off of Representative Marcel's question about the after. So obviously, Ms. Hepler, you do an amazing job of being an advocate during that phase. But what happens when it's done? The perpetrator's been dealt with, and you know you're safe. Like the last panel said, you got a couple of years of quiet. But obviously, right, it doesn't just stop, right? The trauma, the emotional, the anxiety that comes with it, it doesn't just stop. So is that something that then, are you still available for that afterward, or is there then a referral service to like a mental health association or something like that? What's the next step for recovery for somebody who's been through this traumatic experience?
Sure. So that's another element that I think took us by surprise, and we weren't really thinking about it. When I started making my monthly reports, I would say, okay, I had 5 new victims this month. The next month, it's like, oh, I had 6, but I still have 4 that still need me from the last month. And it just keeps compounding to where it's, quite frankly, exhausting. The goal is to refer and get them into counseling or therapies, but unfortunately, everywhere is a wait list. I have also found that my victims tend to just feel safe talking to me, and they're like, I don't really need the therapist. Like, I can be their, 10 p.m. therapist. And that's not conducive, but it really, the services would be better if they felt comfortable moving on. But unfortunately, everywhere has a wait list, and then they just get frustrated.
And then after the fact, again, for on the perpetrator's side, is there any sort of escalation clause or something like that that leads to an increased deterrent to where the perpetrator might think twice before reoffending? Is there any sort of minimum escalator clause to where, if you're a second-time stalking offender, something like that, that the more times you decide to follow, just so that you as the victim then knows, hey, every time this happens, the time that he's gone just gets longer and longer. So is there any sort of escalator clause there, or not in Pennsylvania?
I don't know the answer to that. That might have been a better question for the previous panel. But I would imagine second offenses would increase time.
Because you hate to see, that, you're safe for 2 years, but now I have to do it all again.
As far as the protection order is concerned, no.
Okay.
That's just civil, and you would just restart or get another one reissued. So the protection order would not escalate for a longer time. The longest you can have one in Pennsylvania is 3 years.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing your testimony today. This is the sort of personal testimony that means a lot to us when we go to Harrisburg. We're not just talking about words on a page. We're talking about people and their lives. So thank you very much.
Any other questions from the members? All right, I'll ask a few here. Again, I just want to thank you for sharing your story and being here with us. But today's hearing, I think, was to learn about. Listen, we have these hearings, and we always learn something from them. But there's certain ones out there that you just learn a little bit more. And this is one of those issues that I think I was aware of, but just didn't really realize how prevalent it was, and just how really repulsive and just traumatic it is. And based upon your story and from the last panel, I've really my eyes have been open to this issue, and I think that's what this policy hearing is about. That's what this policy committee is about how do we make Pennsylvania better? How do we bring hope for Pennsylvania? And I think we learned a lot here today from your guys' testimony and the previous testifiers. But before we get out of here today, what is one misconception when we talk about stalking? What is because I think people, when you hear the word stalking, it gives all kinds of different connotation. What is a misconception do you think people don't realize in dealing with victims, or in your case, going through? What is something that unless you're experiencing it, that people don't understand?
I can talk first. I think the misconception with hearing the word stalking is a lot of people think of the Andrew Gold case and something very movie-like, when reality is it happens all the time. And I have victims that are really, really fearful of someone they loved and shared a life with. And I think people see that and think, oh, it's a divorce, a marital dispute, something like that. But they have real fear. And they have fear, almost educated fear, because they know what that person's capable of, and they try to portray it, and it doesn't always come through. I think that would be one of the biggest misconceptions, is that it is that movie stage and not real life that happens every day.
It is like just going through the everyday motions and just the unknown. You just don't know when he's going to pop up again and where, and he's just going to be hiding somewhere. So that's what I guess got me the most.
And Ms. Hebler, I'm glad you brought up the fact that I could see folks seeing this as, just a domestic kind of case, right? I practiced family law before I got to the legislature, and I could distinguish between what was just a husband and wife dispute or something that was a lot more than that. But I think people just kind of put it all in the same pot, and I think that's really unfair. So I'm glad you highlighted that, because even in my experience in dealing with that, you could tell that there were certain cases that were just a little bit more that were not just a typical family dispute. Again, I just want to thank you guys for sharing your stories. Thank you for empowering victims today. Thank you for giving a voice to those folks out there that can't speak for themselves, and having the strength to be here today. And Representative Labs, again, thank you for this wonderful hearing. I think we all learned a lot. I think Representative Labs shows that when she finds an issue, she finds a solution. She's demonstrated that at least twice today, maybe 3 times. I think that's the kind of leadership that we want in Harrisburg, and I really appreciate Representative Labs hosting this hearing, providing some great ideas, and look, there's always issues out there. We address issues every day, but to actually have solutions that she's come up with, I think is pretty powerful too. So I want to turn it over to Shelby here to close us out.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank all of our testifiers that came today, shared your stories. I am so proud and thankful to have gotten to know you, and that you trusted me and us with your stories, and to find the solutions to change it for those moving forward. So thank you. And I'm just really proud that we're changing the conversation. I think for a long time it's been, to everybody's dismay, well, you don't meet the qualifications, so we can't help you. And I think today we took a step to change that. So again, thank you all for all of your work in this space. Thank you all for being here. We are very, very proud of this package of legislation that we've worked on. We will be introducing those bills hopefully next week. We'll make sure that everybody has that. And again, I think we took a big step today. So thank all of you.
And just before we close out here, again, if something you heard today, if you do see this video, if you're a victim of stalking, make sure you're reaching out to law enforcement, and the resources are out there to help you. Awareness is really important in Pennsylvania, and this is another one of those issues. So please reach out to your law enforcement. Our next hearing is in my district, of all places. It will take place next September. Yeah, next week, September 10th. We'll be at Shippensburg University for a hearing on the cost benefits of doing business in Pennsylvania. Until then, this meeting is adjourned.